I'm Melissa Grimes, and this is my Lest We Forget project for Professor Jordan O'Connell's United States History 2, 1302. My figure is Eleanor Roosevelt. In this assignment, we are tasked with to select a controversial or lesser-known American figure from our area of study and prepare a presentation to explore that person's life and consider their legacy in the 21st century. Personally, after looking into several different figures, Eleanor Roosevelt stuck to me and drew me to learn more about her. I found her intriguing, but previously having not learned more about her other than surface level information. She was First Lady to the 32nd United States President, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. But I wanted to know more. My primary source is Eleanor Roosevelt's autobiography, titled The Autobiography of Eleanor Roosevelt. This is a 4-part autobiography in which Miss Roosevelt reflects on various times in her life. Part 1, This Is My Story, helps readers understand her childhood, the trauma and disappointment she endured as a young age, and how she overcame them. Part 2, This I Remember, allows you to see the inner workings of the political life and how it changed Eleanor, as well as the role for women who came behind her. Part 3, On My Own, Miss Roosevelt shares the moment that she plunged herself into various jobs that build international relationships. She calls this the era of brotherhood. The search for understanding is the final part of her autobiography. Miss Roosevelt wrote after the 3 other volumes because she not only chose to reflect on her well-lived life, but stayed completely busy every day. While Eleanor Roosevelt is a well-known First Lady, married to the 32nd President of the United States, she was a pioneer in female advocacy and promoted human rights around the world. Eleanor changed the role of the United States First Lady. From a shy, solemn child of an addict father and a mother who was more concerned with her life as a socialite, Eleanor courageously climbed out of her proverbial shell to conquer languages, barriers, and social norms of the day, to be bold and an amazing asset to both her husband and to her country. Eleanor Roosevelt, born October 11th, 1884, the daughter of Elliott Roosevelt and Anna Hall, was raised in what was best described in an emotional desert. Her father, the brother of Theodore Roosevelt, the 26th President of the United States, struggled with addiction. Her father floated in and out of asylums as frequent as he floated in and out of Eleanor's life, spending large quantities of time out of the country. Her socialite mother paid little attention to making her feel menial about appearance and overall emotional nature. Her mother passed when Eleanor was a mere 8 years old with diphtheria. Her father struggled to find footing in his already struggling role as a father. Eleanor wanted that relationship with her father, who constantly left. The time away grew more after her mother's death. In her autobiography, Eleanor states, "Looking back, I see that I was afraid of something, of the dark, of displeasing people, of failure." Although she struggled with confidence, she was aware of other sufferings. Her father would take her to help serve Thanksgiving dinner at the clubhouse occupied by the Newsboys. Her grandfather spent many years as trustee of the Children's Aid Society. Her grandmother would take her every Christmas to decorate for the babies of the post ward at the postgraduate hospital. She liked working and decorating the trees there for Christmas. Within a year of her mother's death, her brother Ellie, who also died of diphtheria. With her brother's death adding to the already enormous struggling of her father, he succumbed to his addictions and grief, dying when Eleanor was almost 10 years old. Her brother Hall and her went to live with their grandmother Hall, having limited interactions with the Roosevelt family. At 15 years old, she was sent to Allenswood, one of Madame Sylvester's schools, a short distance from London, England. She worked hard and showed practical qualities that pulled her into the headmistress' good graces. So much so that Madame Sylvester took her on a tour of Europe. Eleanor would often go sightseeing alone. This was unheard of and bold for that time. In 1902, she returned home. Thrown into social occasions, she ran into a cousin on her father's side, Franklin. While Eleanor had high ideas of what a woman was, she wanted to experience everything that was the lot of a woman of the new century. In 1903, Franklin, her fifth cousin, once removed, asked her to marry him. She was 19 years old. She and Franklin were president for Theodore Roosevelt's inauguration in March 1905. She never expected to see another inauguration in the family, and she married Franklin 1 week later. In the fall of 1910, Eleanor and Franklin were plunged into the public service as Franklin had felt challenged by President Theodore Roosevelt to serve his country. Much to his surprise, many, Franklin won the New York district election in which a Democrat had not won in 32 years. Having 6 children in a mere 11 years made Eleanor feel like she was good for little more than that during the time. She tried to stay on top of her language studies of French, German, and Italian. Eleanor found it important to remain interested in what Franklin found. When they moved to Albany, New York, Eleanor began to insert herself more into knowing the ins and outs of political service moments she found themselves in. In 1913, Franklin was Assistant Secretary of the Navy. Eleanor had grown bolder and surer of herself and their place in politics, still believing she was there to best aid and serve Franklin. As Franklin ran for United States Senator and was defeated, she grew even more in her independence as wife, mother, and most importantly, a woman. Franklin's duties made it impossible to travel with her and the children. As World War I saw the family torn between differences between Theodore Roosevelt and the then President Wilson's philosophies, while Wilson was uneducated and hesitant to enter the war, Eleanor knew that her uncle Theodore Roosevelt would feel the United States should take sides in this war in Europe. As the social life of Washington became busier, Eleanor found herself thrown into the conferences held. At dinners, she would be having wonderful conversations with political figures, using the languages she had remained fluent in while she was a young bride and mother. With the United States' interest into the World War looming, Franklin and Eleanor began to break away from the mere social life due to the work that needed to be done. Eleanor was present for the congressional meeting as the war was declared on April 6, 1917. As Eleanor worked with the Naval Red Cross rolling wool for bandages and routinely visited the naval hospitals. As she visited the hospital, she noticed the poor conditions of these men who were wounded, and she heard stories after story who had emotional trauma from the bombings and other mental disturbances due to the war. Eleanor employed the help of the Red Cross and begged them to build a recreation room. They did. These men were able to do occupational work and sell what they had made, allowing them to make money to buy new material to continue their therapy work. In January of 1919, Eleanor and Franklin were able to visit the post-war France with the then First Lady, Mrs. Wilson. Eleanor visited the hospitals and took flowers to the soldiers there. As they returned to the States, Eleanor began her work with the International Congress for Women Workers. This organization considered the working conditions of women all around the world. They needed women who spoke foreign languages. She just so happened to have several foreign languages. This was just the beginning of the reach that Eleanor would give to working women around the world, making sure that they were fairly treated. In 1921, Franklin became ill and a condition paralyzed his legs. Continued doing the work for the Democratic women of the state. Eleanor also encouraged Franklin in his rehabilitation as he continued his political activities. As Franklin was governor of New York to the presidency, Eleanor learned from Franklin to be, as she called him, the practical politician. As he campaigned, Franklin took mental observation of where there was an ability for the Great Depression to be turned around. He set up the Civilian Conservative Corps, knowing exactly where the work was needed across the nation. Eleanor was his sidekick. She helped him with all that and more. After Franklin's election to the presidency, Eleanor would hold press conferences for the women reporters, giving these women a unique view of the various political issues. After the attack on Pearl Harbor, the First Lady, having 4 sons involved in the war, inserted herself into action. Knowing that the placement of the New Deal fostered the will of the United States needed to come together, Eleanor spent lots of time working at the Office of Civilian Defense, working on behalf of the then Mayor LaGuardia in New York. Throughout the war and the Franklin's 3 terms as president, Eleanor was never heard to tell her husband, "You ought to do this," or "Franklin, I think you should." No, she found ways to serve alongside and as a public servant in her own right. President Harry Truman even asked Miss Roosevelt to join the General Assembly of the United Nations. She was assigned to work on the Committee 3. This dealt with education, humanitarian, and cultural issues. Eleanor had proven herself during her husband's time in office to be an asset. She helped establish treaties and agreements between countries to enforce the rights of people. Visiting Russia in her time with the United Nations, Eleanor saw the hate and disgust for the American dream. Her life continually fought for the America she knew it could be. Not only was she very instrumental in women having fair working relations, but she was very proactive in the political debate and the need to have them. She said, "In result of debates, more people voted than have ever voted in the history of the country. That was a victory for the democratic system." Wise words from a wise lady. Eleanor proves her value as a remarkable historical figure who left her imprint on history. She said, "There is so much to do and so many engrossing challenges in every day." Her words say it best. She said, "Perhaps the most important thing that has come out of my life is that the discovery that if you prepare yourself at every point as well as you can, with whatever means you may have, however meager they may seem, you may be able to grasp opportunity for broader experience when it appears. Without preparation, you can do nothing." Hello, I'm Melissa Grimes, and this is my Lest We Forget project for Professor Jordan OConnell's United States History.